Guys, I'm so excited to talk about Caravaggio's The Entombment of Christ today. Caravaggio is one of those artists that just sits with you. He's unforgettable, he's relatable, and he is, at least for me, one of those artists that portray what art is really about, connecting with the human experience and emotion. So today, I'm going to talk about Baroque characteristics of art, specifically with Caravaggio's work. Then I'll apply all of those elements and characteristics as I analyze the Entombment of Christ. If this is your first time to my channel, I'm Mrs. Alder. I release new art history videos each Thursday. If you want to get notifications about these videos, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Let's dive in. When we talk about Baroque art, we're not necessarily talking about a style, we're talking about a time period, which is a little tricky to understand, but luckily for us, there's some really distinct Baroque style characteristics, especially within Caravaggio's works, that will help us understand the movement a little bit better. Now, when I think about Baroque, the cheesy line comes into my head, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just a little play on words. Basically what that is saying here is Baroque is following the Renaissance time period. That is not broken. It is perfection. We achieved a rebirth of art during the Renaissance. I say we, but I definitely wasn't involved. They achieved this rebirth of art. They achieved grandness and greatness, and nothing was broken. So the Baroque movement that comes after doesn't need to fix anything. Instead, they add on to it. The descriptive vocabulary I would use to describe Baroque art is the same I would use to describe an opera. Dramatic. It's intense, it's powerful, it's exciting, it's active, it's full of energy, it's alive, it's dynamic, it's intense. That's what this art looks like. But something that I really love about the Baroque time period is the emotion in it. That was their focus. They wanted you as a viewer to become a part of their work. They wanted you to feel something when you looked at it. And they wanted to do this in a way that made it feel natural and realistic. So they used colors and lines and composition in order to make this personal for you. So art from this time period in Italy still has a religious content to it. The reason is because the Catholic Church has just survived the Reformation with their Counter-Reformation. During the Council of Trent, they established an art guideline, basically, that said you needed to display Christian art, but you needed it to be relatable. So when we talk about the Caravaggio piece today, it does have a lot of Christian emotions attached to it. So if you are of the Catholic faith, it's really easy to feel some of those intended emotions. But even if you're not, those emotions are still there. So as we look at the Entombment of Christ today, and as I dive into what makes it Baroque, I want you to allow yourself to feel something. I don't really care what it is. I just want you to kind of embrace the work and just do a mental and physical check on like, how does this make you feel? All right, it's time. Caravaggio is one of those artists that follows the rules, but also breaks them within the boundaries. So he does depict religious content that maintains the ideas set apart by the Council of Trent, but he does it in his own way. In fact, a lot of people in the church didn't like his art at all. In fact, they said it was anti-Christ of him to paint these pieces the way he did. But that's also what makes it so relatable and so human. I created 6 identifiers or 6 artistic characteristics that we can use to identify a Caravaggio work. So I'm going to cover those 6 and then we're going to apply them to the Entombment of Christ. Now, as I talk about these things, think to yourself how it fits in with this Baroque style. First, the first thing that Caravaggio does that I think is brilliant is he uses average, everyday people as models for his works. Now, if we think about the Renaissance, specifically Raphael, he used multiple models and combined them into the perfect woman in order to depict his Virgin Mary. And it was very common to pick beautiful models to depict in your art. Caravaggio completely turns it on his head and pulls people from the streets who are dirty, who are sunburned, who have receding hairlines and no shoes, and he uses them as his models. This is a way for it to feel more natural, to feel more realistic. to make you as the viewer connect with the people there. That's attainable. That's something I could be, or that could be me. The second thing Caravaggio does in his art is he reduces the lofty religious content to a more basic human drama in order to help us understand it a little bit more. So he takes these grand events in the Bible that happen with Christ's life and he brings it down to our level. He makes it less grand. He makes it attainable. He makes these characters somebody you might recognize. But again, the idea is naturalism. He wants us to take part of his art. The third thing Caravaggio does is he creates incredibly strong diagonals. Now, diagonals in Baroque art are super important because they add energy and dynamism to the piece. They also help guide your eye to the center of the piece. It's a focal point. But the way Caravaggio does this is he plays with light, which brings us to the fourth characteristic of Caravaggio, and that is his use of light versus dark. He is a master manipulator of light. He often uses light to add drama and intensity and energy to the piece, but similar to the diagonal, it also draws your attention. A lot of his light sources come from a single place, meaning it looks more like stage lighting, where your eye is directed to the center and the focus. The fifth thing that Caravaggio does is he works with natural earthy colors. A lot of greens, golds, reds, browns, really similar to Venetian Renaissance, because these are more attainable colors. They're colors you recognize. This is really important, especially after we're coming off the Renaissance and the Mannerism, where there's lots of pastel colors that make it seem otherworldly. Caravaggio uses earth tones to bring it back to our sphere. And the sixth thing, the last thing that Caravaggio does is he adds all the feels that he possibly can into the piece. He adds emotion. He wants you, again, to feel something as you look at it. And he's going to do this through people's facial expressions, but also through the content. Let's go ahead and apply these characteristics to one of Caravaggio's most infamous pieces, the Entombment of Christ. Now, this originally was meant to be displayed in the Church of the Pietà in Rome, but it currently resides in the Vatican City in their art museum, which is open to the public, so add it to your must-see list. What are we looking at here? In order to understand the Baroque aspects and Caravaggio's intent, we need to understand what's happening in the piece. So this scene is called the Entombment of Christ. It's a scene connected with Christ's Passion, where the deceased Christ is laid to rest in his tomb. We're looking here, we see 6 figures in the painting. They're set up in a pyramid style, which we'll talk about in a minute. Starting at the top, you see 3 women. Left to right, you have Mary, the Virgin, so the mother of Jesus. She's depicted not as a perfect, youthful, idealized female, but instead she's old and she looks like a widow. The woman in the center is Mary Magdalene, who was a female disciple of Christ. And then the third person is also named Mary, so we have 3 Marys, and she is Mary Clopas, who, according to the Gospel of John, was there at the burial of Christ. The next step down, you have 2 males. On the left, this is John, the Beloved, the apostle of Christ. He's robed in that red. And then the other man to the right is Nicodemus, who was also there at the burial. He was the one who removed the nails from Christ's feet when they took him off the cross. And then, of course, the final figure is Christ. So let's go through these characteristics. The first characteristic of a Caravaggio is he uses average, everyday people as models. And I want to go ahead and zoom in on Nicodemus, because I think this is one of my favorite models that has ever been used. So as you zoom in on him, I love looking at his skin. He's tanned, it's weathered, it's wrinkled. You can see pockmarks in it. His nose is kind of ruddy, it's red and pink. His hairline is receding, which was not fashionable at this time, and he just looks tired. He looks tired to me. He looks sad, he looks forlorn, but he also looks like a real person, somebody that I could see as I'm walking through the streets. Caravaggio was known to take homeless people off the streets and use them as his models. So that's one way that Caravaggio brings it down to our level. He's no longer idealizing the characters who are associated with Christ. Instead, he's making them relatable to us. If you zoom in on his feet, you can see they're hairy, they're dirty, and he's barefoot. This is not somebody who is wealthy. This is an average person, a simple follower of Christ. We also see this humanistic nature if you look at the Mother Mary. She is depicted old. She has wrinkles. She's shrouded in this headdress, and she looks sad. Her cheeks are sunken in. Again, not idealized, but realistic. The second thing Caravaggio does is he brings the loftiness of the material down to our level. And we can see this here with the drama of the three women in the back. So let's go ahead and focus in there. These are the three Marys, and typically when we see these Marys, they're idolized women, they're visions of perfection, they're perfectly composed. But here, as you look at the three Marys, they seem to be reacting to the death of somebody they loved. So we've talked about the Mother Mary. You can see her arms outstretched, kind of down in a diagonal as her hand hovers over Christ's head, almost as this comforting, motherly experience. She's watching them bury her son. Mary Magdalene in the center, I think, is beautiful. She's got that smooth skin. You can tell she's a little bit younger, but I like how she's clutching this white handkerchief as she wipes away the tears from her eyes. And our final Mary is very dramatic, which is where we get some of this Baroque. Her arms are reaching up towards heaven. She looks towards heaven as if in anger as to why is this happening, questions, doubting. Again, these lofty, religious, sacred women are brought down to our experiences. You can almost see levels of grief here. With the Virgin Mary, you see kind of this comforting, motherly sorrow. With Mary Magdalene, you see the heartache and the sadness. And with Mary Klopas, you can see just exasperation and perhaps anger or questioning. So again, lofty things brought down to our level. The other way Caravaggio does this is it's an unknown place. It's not lofty, it's not covered in gold, it's not a tomb of a king or the Son of God, but it's very just like simple and plain. It's not extravagant. It's on our level. Third thing brings us to diagonals. Now, at first glance at this image, you might say, like, there's no diagonals in there. What are you talking about, Alder? You're crazy. But I'm going to point out some things that you'll notice will help draw our eyes to the center of the piece. So we're going to start with the stone slab that they're standing on. They believe this is where his body was prepared for burial, but I want you to notice that the corner is what's sticking out towards us. It's a very strong diagonal lines. In fact, it's the convergence of two diagonal lines as they're jutting into our space. So it's almost breaking this like wall between viewer and art as these diagonals come straight for us. Other diagonals you'll see, Christ's body is in a strong diagonal. His head is further back from us than like his hip bones or his feet. So you can see the artist has kind of tilted it a little bit to give him a strong diagonal. Also his arm, you can see, kind of has a little diagonal to it as well. Nicodemus also has some pretty strong diagonals. His elbow is created in the same way that stone slab is. We've got two diagonal lines of his upper arm and his lower arm jutting out into our space. So again, the diagonal of coming out towards us is a diagonal, but you can also see the back foot has a diagonal line as well. Finally, the strongest diagonal, I think, comes from Mary Klopas's arms as they're raised high into the sky. You can see that those hands drive your eye towards her face, drive you to Mary Magdalene's face, drive you to Nicodemus, which then drives you to Christ's body. So you can see compositionally in this pyramid structure, we have really strong diagonal lines that focus and bring our eyes in. The purpose of this is to introduce viewers to the space of the piece. There is a specific place for you in the painting. Nicodemus's elbow and the stone slab jut out into your space, inviting you into that space. So the diagonal lines have a purpose for you as a viewer, which I think is really interesting. Fourth thing, lighting. He, again, is a master of light, and I think you'd agree with me after you've been looking at this piece. 2 words that I want to teach you about. The first word is tenebrism. Tenebrism means dark paintings almost, and how you can recognize tenebrism is you can see it looks like it's painted at night. So the background is completely black with no hints that something is back there. It's very dark, and the light is very intense, almost like stage lighting. You've got a spotlight on the scene. The second word is chiaroscuro. It literally means light dark in Italian, and is often confused with tenebrism. Where tenebrism has this dark background and the stage lighting from one source, chiaroscuro uses lighting and shading to create a 3-dimensional effect on a piece. So I'm going to draw your attention to the figure of John the Beloved, looking at his face. He's clearly got this juxtaposition of lightness and darkness on his face that comes from that tenebrism light source, but it also uses chiaroscuro to give us this definition that this is a 3-dimensional figure. I think you can see this best when you look at the side of his nose, when you look at his mouth, and when you look at where his chin connects with his neck. You can see the master of shading that's happening there to give us the effect that this is a 3-dimensional person. You can also see it in Nicodemus's legs. He uses chiaroscuro to define the anatomy of the muscles and the veins in his legs. He's using lightness and darkness to do that. He's not necessarily using straight lines to outline these pieces, but he's using shadow or this chiaroscuro to give us the impression that it's 3-dimensional. 5th, color, earthy colors. When you look at it, what do you see? Burnt orange, dark green, this kind of earthy red, lots of gold. Again, Caravaggio is bringing us back to earth and using these earth tones to make us feel connected to the piece. What I love about the colors in this one is there are 2 that particularly grab my attention in my eye. On John the Beloved's red shawl that he has, and on Christ's white clothing, right? These 2 things draw my eye immediately, and there's symbolism in these colors, especially symbolism in the Christian faith, where red is a symbol of royalty, but it's also a symbol of blood and sacrifice. And you also have white, which is a sign of purity and sacrifice. So having these 2 colors draw your eyes towards the center of the piece really helps you understand the symbolic measure of this. You could also say that, the red connects to the wine in the Eucharist, and the white connects to the bread in the Eucharist, which is a sacrament of Christ's body, which is what we are currently looking at. The last thing is the emotion, all of the feelings that are entangled in this piece. You can see the emotion in each of the characters' facial expressions, but there's also some emotion that is specifically focused to you. There's this combination of life and death in this piece. You have the very much alive, dramatic movement of the characters at the top of the pyramid, the raising of the hands, the weeping, the lifting. It's heavy, it's alive. And then you have the very, deceased Christ. He hangs limp, his arm is falling, his head is drooped back, his mouth is open. So you have this connection of these 2 ideas, that this juxtaposition really solidifies this Christian theme of Christ's death and his sacrifice. In the bottom left hand of the painting, you can see there's a little botanical shrubbery there. This plant is known as mullein, and it's believed to possess medical properties and to ward off evil spirits. But for the Christian faith, it symbolizes the coming resurrection and the triumph of death. So having the juxtaposition of the alive figures and the dead Christ, along with this plant, solidifies that yes, there is sorrow in this piece, immense sorrow, but there's also hope. There's hope in what comes next, in the resurrection, in what is to come. In fact, if you look at Christ's hand, specifically his veins, you can see that they are still full of blood. There's life and spirit running through his veins still. The final emotion that comes from this piece comes from the use of those diagonal lines. When you look at this piece, your eye level is at that corner of that that stone slab. You're standing there looking directly at it. And if you contemplate where you are in the piece, you become a part of it. So where you're standing is in the grave of Christ. You're standing there, and it's almost as if they are handing you the body of Christ, and you get to decide if you're going to take it or not. Which you can imagine symbolically for Christians is a wonderful image, especially if this is an altar piece right above the sacrament or the Eucharist table, where people come up to take these soul-saving emblems of Christ's body and blood in order to be saved. They're literally taking Christ, they're taking him and allowing him to become a part of their life. Is a beautiful imagery, a little haunting, but also very sacred. This idea that you can become a part of this. And this is why Caravaggio is a master at what he does. He's able to connect to that human emotion of sorrow, of pain, of suffering, of acceptance, of hope. And he does it in one piece. Caravaggio is arguably one of the greatest artists of all times. And now you can see why. The way he's able to captivate you as the viewer, bringing you into the scene with his strong diagonals, having a scene as grand and as sacred as this one, and make it something you can connect to on a personal level. That's incredible. Please comment below with any questions, suggestions, or requests that you might have. If you liked the video, click that like button, share it with all of your art history friends, and remember to subscribe to the channel if you want to continue seeing these videos that I release every Thursday. I'll see you guys next time, where the art just keeps getting better.